Okay, today Be'ez Hashem is Daf Nun Hey in Masechet Kesubos. We will begin from Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis, beginning of the fifth parak in Masechet Kesubos. The mission begins. Over here, parak Afalpi. Afalpi she'amru besula goyim misnayim ba'almana mona. Even though we know that a besula collects 200 and almana collects 100, and that's part of the main part of the ksuba. Chazal made that number up, and some say it's from the Torah. In Ratz Lahaisiv, if a person wants to be generous and wants to give a big ksuba for his wife, he can add 100 times 100 mana, which is basically 50 times the original ksuba, and that's permitted to do so. If he's so excited about getting married, so he can commit himself to a bigger ksuba. This Armalite, this here he became a widow. He died. She became a widow, or he divorced her. Now, even if they only got engaged, so one could argue and say we can assume that he committed to this big ksuba only because thinking that he's going to eventually build a family with this lady. He's going to go to the wedding and he's going to have a family. So if he wrote a ksuba, and at the time of the Erison, since he wrote the ksuba at the time of the Erison, and at the time of the Erison, he committed to this large ksuba. So the Mishnah says, she would collect everything. She would collect everything from this ksuba. That's the opinion of the Tanakama. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, Min Hanasuin, you're right, if he died or divorced her after they went through the marriage, then she collects everything. But if they only got engaged, the basula goyve Messiah, Valmona. The basula will collect 200, and Almana will collect only 100. Why? He only intended that he's going to write this big suba unless he was going to marry her, but he didn't marry her. So, albeit he wrote down on the ksuba that he's writing at the Erison, which he didn't even have to write a ksuba at Erison. Technically, you write only these ksubas by the marriage, but he wrote it at the engagement party. So we can understand that if he divorces her at that time and never took it to the wedding day, he would only have to pay the ikar ksuba, the 200, or the almana gets 100, but the additional commitment that he made, he's not obligated to pay. So let's learn terms over here. Ikar ksuba refers to the main ksuba of 100 for an almana, 200 zuz for a basula. Taisvis ksuba is referred to what he is obligating himself above and beyond what he's required to do, and that's called taisvis ksuba. And there is machlekes between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the Tanakama if someone passed on prior to going to the wedding day, or he divorced her before the wedding day. Is he still required to pay the taisvis ksuba? Is his estate required to pay the taisvis ksuba? Or was that commitment only made on the intention? His intention was to take it to marriage, to take it to a wedding, and he never did. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, in Rotza Kaisub Ksula, Rabbi Yehuda holds the whole idea of a Ksubas is anyway, the Rabbanan. So therefore, in Rotza Kaisub Ksula Shtasham Saim, he Kesubos is Gebaltim Memecha Mona. A person could write to a lady, hi, I'm giving you 200 for your Ksuba. And she has Rahmana, she doesn't want him to commit so much. So she writes, and here's a receipt that you got that I received 100 mana, 100 zuz. Well, she never really received it, but that can be done to lower the obligation of the husband. Or for example, almana mana. We know an almana is supposed to get 100 zuz. The Kesubos, and she writes a receipt for him. I got already 50 zuz, and therefore, in the event that you have to pay ksuba, you only have to pay me 50 zuz. It could be not true, but she can make it ease the financial burden on him by writing these kinds of receipts. Rameir says, if someone who writes less, for basula 200 and an almana 100. Arezi be'ulav zuz. If anything less than amount of that, if the husband and wife live with each other, it's a be'ilas nus, because she doesn't really commit herself to the marriage, because there's so little financial incentive in this marriage. And Rameir holds the idea of ksuba is daraisa anyway. And therefore he writes that if there's any amount that if it's less than the amount of Messiah for Basula on Almona, it's considered to be a Be'ilas Zunos. Also, in Rameir, this is also comes up the halacha. If a husband or wife lost their ksuba, if the wife lost her ksuba per se, then they can't live with each other. It's a Be'ilas Nus. It's an adulterous relationship because she doesn't feel secure about the marriage because she doesn't have the document in her hand. In other words, true that if he would divorce her or he would die, she would get ksuba even though she doesn't have the ksuba document in her hand. But the fact is, when she's married to him and she's not holding on to a ksuba paper, she doesn't feel committed or secure about the marriage. So it's almost like a be'ila snus. So a husband and wife always has to check to make sure that the ksuba is still intact. Okay, we're going to discuss more about Yehuda and Meir's machlokes in the Gemara. So the Gemara asks a question. The Gemara says that in the Mishnah, it came up with this novel idea that if a husband wants to commit to above and beyond the main part of the ksuba, so he wants to commit to a larger ksuba, he's allowed to do so. So the Gemara asks, Shita, of course he's allowed to do so. Why shouldn't he be allowed to do so? A person could commit his money anywhere he wants to. The Gemara says, Mahu the same. I would have thought, I would think that the Rabbanan said there should be a set amount, but everybody has to pay the same amount. Why? Because think about what could happen. Some people are going to commit to a very large ksuba, and some people who don't have the financial means will feel pressure to commit to a larger ksuba than they could afford. Or they'll be embarrassed to say that they can't afford a large ksuba. So I would have thought that we don't allow anybody to commit more taisus ksuba, more additional ksuba than is required. Kamash Malan, that we allow that. We allow people to add on to the initial ksuba. Now, the Gemara says like this. The Mishnah says you adding on to the initial ksuba. It's not like a separate obligation. Ratzel Lichtev law, loiketan. It doesn't say that you're writing a separate obligation. You're adding on to your initial obligation. So what's the difference? Suppose your initial ksuba is 200 and you're adding 800 as Toys's ksuba, the additional part of the ksuba. So you're obligated to pay the extra 800. But now we view it as one package of a ksuba. It's like you owe 1,000 in ksuba. We don't look at it as two separate obligations. What's the difference? So there'll be a difference. The Gemara is going to say 14 differences. This is proof to what Rav Evi said in the name of Rav Yanai. Rav Evi said in the name of Rav Yanai, any condition that's written in the ksuba has the same halachic status as the regular ksuba. Nafkemina, what's the difference? The mecheres. If a woman sells a ksuba, and a woman sells a ksuba, that someone else has the right to collect the ksuba. Remember, they're only selling a call option because if the husband dies, she collects a ksuba. But if she dies, there's no ksuba collected here. So it's like a risky the purchaser is taking on a financial risk. But the bottom line is, if she wrote and sold her ksuba, she not only sold the ksuba, but she sold the whole package of the ksuba, which includes the additional payments that he committed to. That choices ksuba. Or the halach is, if a woman says to her husband, "No, honey, I forgive you the ksuba. If it ever comes down to it, you don't have to pay ksuba." Of course, you cannot sleep with her. You cannot stay with her anymore because she's without a ksuba. But let's ignore that point. If she just said, "I forgive you for the ksuba," she's not only forgiving the regular ksuba, she's forgiving the taisus ksuba. Lomayredes. Or if a woman is rebellious, a woman decides, "I'm not having relations with my husband." So we're going to learn later on, if a woman says that, she's a rebellious wife, and we start deducting from her ksuba. Not only do we deduct from her ksuba weekly, as long as this is going on, but we continue to deduct that she'll lose not only her ksuba, her taisus ksuba as well. So that's called meredes. Lupagemes. The pagemes means that if she wounded her ksuba, what does that mean? A woman who comes to collect the ksuba and says, "I didn't collect my ksuba," we give it to her, and we don't ask any questions. But let's say she comes to collect the ksuba. "My husband, you divorced me, you owe me ksuba." And he says, "I paid you a little bit of it." And she says, "You're right, you paid me, but I'm trying to collect the other half." the other part that you didn't pay me. Then she has to swear that she didn't get all of it, or that she didn't collect the ones, because since she already admitted she started that she was already paid part of it. Therefore, she's required to swear that she didn't collect any of the other part that she's now claiming. So therefore, if a woman says, I already received my toisus ksuba, and all I'm collecting is the regular ksuba, the ikar ksuba, she would have to make a shvua. In that case, because toisus ksuba and ksuba are one of the same, they're one package. L'toibas, the halacha is, we learned yesterday. A woman says, takes her the husband's estate to court and says, I want to collect the ksuba. As soon as she says that, that means she's giving intention that she wants to get married again. And therefore, she doesn't get food provisions from the husband's estate anymore. We stop the food provision. We give her the one lump payment for ksuba. But let's say she only is claiming she wants to just collect the toisus ksuba, not the regular ksuba. The answer is, once she starts collecting the toisus ksuba, it's like you trying to collect the regular ksuba. She loses mezainis. She doesn't get the food provisions from the husband's estate. A woman could lose her ksuba. How could she lose her ksuba? By deciding to feed her husband non-kosher, non-meiser food. So then she's transgressing over the Torah law, and she's causing her husband to sin. So not only will she lose, if she's found guilty, she can not only loses her ksuba, but she could also lose she also loses her regular ksuba, her toisus ksuba, the additional part of the ksuba. We go to Nun Hey Amud Aleph. The Shabbat. Shabbat refers to like this. Shabbat refers to the increase in asset, the fluctuation of the price of the value of the assets of the deceased husband. So in other words, like this. Suppose a guy dies and his value of, when he died, the value of the estate was worth $10 million. And then months go by and the value of the estate increased to $12 million. So because in that estate originally was her ksuba, did her ksuba go up in value or not? So the answer is her ksuba doesn't go up in value because only the ksuba is only valued at the time of death, but it doesn't participate in the increase, the market increase that occurred after the husband's death until the time she actually collected it. Not only does the ksuba not participate in that, but the toisus ksuba does not participate in that increase in value. The shvua, again, a woman trying to collect ksuba from her husband. Her husband divorced her, sent her a divorce. The husband went to another country and sent her a divorce. Now she's coming to collect the ksuba and he's not around. So she has to swear that she never collected her ksuba. And not only that, if she's trying to collect her toisus ksuba, she would also have to swear that she didn't collect her toisus ksuba in order to collect her ksuba. Toisus ksuba and ksuba are one and the same. And we require her to take an oath that she did not get a side check from her husband, that paid her out already. She has to swear that she never collected anything from it. V'lashviyis, shmita. Shmita cancels all obligations. We know that. So if a loan obligation is out there, it's all canceled. But a ksuba is not canceled. Even though it's an obligation to the husband, to the wife, potentially. So it's not canceled. Not only is ksuba not canceled, but the toisus ksuba is also not canceled via shmita. Someone writes, all my possessions belong to my sons, except I'm designating this small piece of land I'm giving to my wife. And she said, I like that piece of land. I agree, that should be mine for my ksuba. Not only does she loses her ksuba, but she loses her toisus ksuba, even though the land may not be worth what the ksuba and toisus ksuba is worth, but she forgave the husband the rest of it. So she could only collect that piece of land, and the rest of the assets belong to his sons. Ligbois min hakarka, ksuba obviously can be collected from property. There's a lien on his property to collect the ksuba, and toisus ksuba as well has a lien. You have a lien on the property for the toisus ksuba. Min haziburius, you collect, just like ksuba is collected from his worst property. right? When a woman's collecting her ksuba, she collects from not his best property, but from his worst one. So also when it comes to collecting the Tosfos ksuba, it's from his worst property, not from his best property, but albeit she has a claim against his real estate. Here's another interesting thing. A woman whose husband died, and she's living in her husband's house. So as she can live there for 50 years, and then at the end of 50 years, decide she wants to collect the ksuba, and we'll give it to her. But if she moved into her own apartment or she moved back to her parents' home, so then she has a 25-year statute of limitations to be able to collect the ksuba. Once that expires, she can't collect the ksuba. And therefore, if that 25-year came passed and she was living in not the husband's house, but in another apartment, then she loses the right to collect the ksuba, and she also loses the right to collect her Tosfos ksuba. Ula ksubas benin different, and the halacha is of ksubas benin different. We've already discussed this. A man has two wives, and here what could potentially happen. When he has two wives and children from each wife. Let's say he had 2 children from the first wife, 10 children from the next wife. When the women die in his lifetime, the ksuba that he didn't have to pay reverts back to the husband, and therefore now when he dies, all the ksuba is split evenly amongst his children. What part of the conditional part of the ksuba is that each woman's own children collect first their mother's ksuba as if she was alive, because Minatara, she doesn't collect any ksuba. She died first, but they collect her mother's ksuba, and they split it amongst themselves, and each set of children split their mother's ksuba amongst themselves, and then they split up the rest of the inheritance. And what can happen is like this: you can already see that the ksuba that's split among one wife who only had 2 children, her ksuba split 50-50, but the ksuba that belonging to the other wife that had 10 children is split 10 ways. So, but that's the halacha. Ksubas benin different. It's a rabbanan takana to make sure that her individual boys and her individual dowry that she brought in is only remaining with her real children and doesn't get transferred to another wife's children. That's ksubas benin different. So all these things, just like the children, her own children will collect her ksuba, they will also collect her Tosfos ksuba. So again, the bottom line is that when someone commits extra money for ksuba called Tosfos ksuba, so then not only it's not a separate obligation, it becomes part and parcel with the original ksuba, and it's looked at as one big commitment of ksuba. And if you count it up, the Gemara just said 14 nafkaminas. The Gemara continues. Itmar we learn ksuba's been indifferent. Ksuba's been indifferent. Again, it's boys collecting their mother's ksuba, right, from the assets of their father. So it's their mother who would have gotten a ksuba, but instead died, right? She died, and the husband, sort of collected the ksuba. When he dies, the ksuba that really was intended for their mother now goes directly to the boys. Now, a regular ksuba, a woman that's collecting a regular ksuba, has a lien on the property. So if the husband sold property in his lifetime and has no assets for her to get paid back on her ksuba, she can go, foreclose on properties that were sold in her husband's lifetime. So the Gemara says, what about when the boys are inheriting the ksuba? So ksubas b'din dichrim. So there it was machlekes between Pumbedisa, a yeshiva in Pumbedisa. They said loy tarfim shaveh. There's no lien on assets. They can't foreclose on property that was sold in their father's lifetime. Yirtin Tanam, because in the ksuba, that part of the ksuba, it says that their boys are going to inherit their mother's ksuba. Just like an inheritance, you don't foreclose on property that your father sold, even though he was selling your inheritance. But you only divide inheritance that exists at the time of death. That's it. So also this idea of boys collecting their mother's ksuba will only be from the assets that are available when the father dies, nothing else. But in Masa Makasi, went one step further. Amri, they said tarfum and shabde. They could foreclose and put a lien on properties that were sold in their father's lifetime. to call back their mother's ksuba. And yisbun because in the ksuba it says that they're going to get it no matter what. Yisbun. So it's a question: what is written in the Tanai ksuba when they write it up in ksuba and they're writing this clause? B'nin dichran, are they writing yirchun that the boys are going to inherit, or the boys are going to get it no matter what? The Hilkasad halacha is loy tarfim and shabde. They don't get mishubadim. Yirchun shnan. It says yirchun. They don't collect from leaned assets. But that's the halacha of benin dichron. As I mentioned yesterday, that we don't write benin dichron anymore. It's not involved in our ksubas. Ksubas benin dichron. Anyway, that clause is left out in the ksuba. Now let's go back to a woman. Then, since we're mentioning machlokes between the two yeshivas of Pumbedisa and Bnei Masa Machasya, so I wonder why one yeshiva is called Bnei Masa Machasya and one is called Pumbedisa. Bnei stands for the sons of Masa Machasya, or maybe that's the name of the yeshiva. Anyway, a woman who's coming, let's say a woman, her husband said, here's a safe. And whatever the jewelry that's in the safe, that's your ksuba. So when he dies, and she's trying to collect the ksuba, she doesn't have to take a shvuah. She just said the commitment was for anything in this safe. So if you have movable objects and they're around, and those objects were committed for her ksuba, so she collects it below shvuah. She doesn't have to take a shvuah. But if they're not around, let us say, the safe got broken into, and the husband was aware that it got broken into, and items were stolen, and then he died. So if she comes to collect ksuba, she doesn't have to take an oath, because he probably didn't write her a check after these metaltalin was stolen, after the safe was broken into. So she never really collected a ksuba, and we trust her without an oath. From that yeshiva, they said she needs to take an oath, because once the father knew that this stuff was stolen, maybe he wrote her a check or gave her somewhere else privately for ksuba, and she started collecting the ksuba. So if she's coming to collect the ksuba from the estate, she has to take an oath. The hilchah said the halacha is below shvuah; she doesn't have to take an oath. Next Gemara. If a man designated a piece of land and he wrote a survey on the land, this piece of property, and here's all four corners of its location, and this is where you're going to collect the ksuba, nothing else. So when he dies, she brings that document that he committed this property for her ksuba. She doesn't have to take an oath. Obviously, it's hers. But b'chad mitzvah, if he committed a property with one border, let's say the property in the north, but it's not clear which property he committed for her ksuba. So Pumbedisa Amre B'lo Shvuah. Pumbedisa says when she comes to collect ksuba, she doesn't have to take a shvuah because we see that the husband wanted to give a piece of real estate to her for her ksuba, and he probably didn't write her a private check and to pay her out her ksuba. So she doesn't have to take an oath if she wants to take ksuba. So the people of Masa Mechasya say bishvuah. She has to take an oath because since he wasn't clear which property he's designating for her ksuba, maybe he had second thoughts and said, you know what, let me pay you the ksuba, I'm writing you a check. And the children of the estate don't know anything about it. So if she's going to come to collect ksuba again, she's going to have to take an oath that she never received anything for a ksuba. The halacha is there is no shvuah over here. One last thing, that there was a machlokes between Pumbedisa and Masa Mechasya. If a man said to a witnesses, write up and sign a document that I am giving over a piece of property to so and so, right? He wanted to transfer a title to somebody, and konimine, and he made a kinyan. In other words, he lifted an item to demonstrate his commitment to what he is saying, and the witnesses see it. So once you make a kinyan and you demonstrate by lifting an item, like similar to what we do when we sell chametz by the road, so then he can never change his mind. So all the Eidim have to do is go home, and the Eidim just write up the document, and they don't have to re-question him and ask him, did you really, really mean it? Because there's no changing of his mind. But loy konimine, let's say he did not make a kinyan. He just said, Kisvu v'chismu v'habole. Just write up a document, sign your name, that I'm giving over, that you're my witness, I'm giving over rights, title to this property to this person. Now, as long as they didn't write up the document, right, technically, the man, that the gifter, can actually change his mind. So the question is, do you have to re-ask him, do you mean what you say? You don't have to re-ask him, do you mean what you say? You don't have to re-ask him. He said it once, that's it. We have to re-ask him. Since at this moment, as long as they didn't write it up, he could still retract. So you have to double check to see if he really means it. The Hilchas of Allah is tzarich in duche beit. You have to re-ask that person to make sure that he's still committed to his gift. The Gemara continues. We learned in the Mishnah that Rav Elazar ben Azariah said an opinion, and he said that when someone commits to Tosfos Kesuba, he is only committing on basically, we can assume, even though he didn't verbally express this, that we assume that he meant to commit to this extra money on the condition that he actually went through wedding and the chuppah with this lady. And his idea is to commit to this large number because, he's so happy that he's going to go to a wedding, build a family with her. So therefore, if he died or if he divorced her, so then they're not required to pay the Tosfos Kesuba. They have to pay the main part of the Kesuba, but not the Tosfos Kesuba. And this was all the assumption is that they actually wrote a Kesuba by Erusin. Technically, you only write it by the wedding day, but if you wrote it by the Erusin, by the engagement, even though he committed to that large amount, if he died at that moment, we make the assumption that he only meant to give it if he would actually follow through with the wedding with this lady. So, but Itma Rav Nasan or Rav Nasan, Chadom Halacha Rav Elazar ben Azariah, Chadom Ein Halacha Rav Elazar ben Azariah. One said that halacha follows Rav Elazar ben Azariah, that you don't have to pay Tosfos Kesuba because we make assumptions for the person. Chadom Ein Halacha Rav Elazar ben Azariah. And one said the halacha is not like Rav Elazar ben Azariah because we don't make assumptions for a person unless they verbally, if they verbally express themselves, we don't try to figure out what's going through their mind, even though it makes perfect sense. This time, let us prove Rav Nasan Hudam Halach Rav Elazar ben. Let us prove that Rav Nasan was the one that said the halach is Rav Elazar ben. Because it's not clear. Was it Rav who said the halach is like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, or Rabbi Nasan said the halach is like Rav Elazar ben Azariah? Let's prove that it was Rav Nasan. Why? Because Rav Nasan, the Shamini later Rav Nasan, we find elsewhere Rav Nasan Azul Bas Umdana. He bases his halacha based on our estimation of what the intention of the person is in other places. The Amar Rav Nasan said, halacha ki Rav Shimon Shuzuri bim Sukkah. The halacha is like Rav Shimon Shuzuri in two places. One, ben Sukkah, and one, we're going to go to Amar Beis, Betrumas Maisa Shel Demai. So what is this Sukkah over here? The halacha is like Rav Shimon Shuzuri means that if a person said, a person's on his deathbed, he's about to die. He says, write up a get to my wife. And that's it. He probably doesn't want her to fall to Yibam. But the problem is he never said, give the get to my wife. So the Eidim understood that probably he was so confused, he forgot to say the word give. But we know his intention was to give the get to his wife. Rav Shimon Shuzuri says they should give the get to the wife. And it's a get. And she's divorced. Because we put assumptions, we understand why he did it. He wouldn't just write a get to my wife and not mean it. He probably meant it as something that he really wants to give to his wife. So we see Rav Elazar ben Azariah that Rav Nasan holds that you do Azul Basha Umdana. We go based on the estimation of the person and we try to figure out what his intention was. So if Rav Nasan is the one that holds like Rav Elazar ben Azariah, Rav does not hold like Rav Elazar ben Azariah. That's what the Gemara says. Now the halacha is like Rav Shimon Shuzuri b'm Sukkah, and there's another case by Trumas Maisa Shel Demai, which is another off topic over here that we pass Rav Shimon Shuzuri. So the Gemara asks a question. Rav also basel umdana. You're telling me that Rav cannot paskin like Rav Elazar ben Azariah because Rav was the one that says you don't make estimations of what's going on in a person's head. So that's not true. That's not true because I'll find you a place where Rav tries to figure out why a person did something, and we can assume that he intentionally did something, and we apply halachic reasoning, we apply halachic dinim to it. For example, when a person's on his deathbed, right, and he's saying that I want to give so and so X amount of money, right? If he wants to give so and so his automobile, okay, he's on his deathbed. I want to give so and so the automobile. Just by verbally saying that, the automobile will revert to that person after the guy dies, because Chazal gave the person on his deathbed any power of kinyan. That's called shiv meirah. He's on his deathbed. You don't have to do kinyan. His word is enough. If he would die, the automobile belongs to that person. However, if he did not die, then the automobile comes back to him. He actually, came up, because we understand that a person doesn't give away his possessions unless he feels that he's about to die. That's called shchimara. A person with a shchimara, you don't have to do a kinyan. You don't have to lift up an item to demonstrate that you're committed to it. So what happens in this following case? Well, Itma we learned back in the Gemara, matna shchimara, a gift of somebody on his deathbed. Shekosaba, he wrote a document up, which he didn't even have to write a document, but he wrote a document, and he wrote kinyan, that he's making a kinyan that this thing that his commitment belongs, his automobile belongs to so and so, right? So now he didn't have to do that. So we know that he's a shchimara, and he's doing actions that indicate that he's healthy, that he's type of kinyan, that he's doing the kinyan, the way to gift somebody, the way a healthy person gifts something to somebody. So the Bey Rav, Mishmei Rav Amin, yeshiva boys that learned in Rav's yeshiva said in the name of Rav, we give him the power. He's riding on two white horses. We give him the power of a gift of a shchimara, and we give him the power of a gift of a healthy person. We'll explain what that means. I don't know what this guy means. The whole document, the whole gift is null and void. Now the Gemara explains. But they Rav, Mishmei the Rav Amri, in Yeshiva of Rav, they said in the name of Rav, why did a person do such a thing? Why did a person gift it as a shchid mirah and also gift it as a healthy person? Because he wanted to give the gift the power of both, which means it has a din like a healthy gift, and it has a din like a shchimara gift. Somebody who's on his deathbed. It's a type of gift that cuts both ways. It's like a healthy person's gift. Since he made a kinyan with it, he said, I'm gifting you my automobile, and here it is, I'm gifting it to you, I'm writing it in a document. Well, it's as if he committed to it. If he becomes healthy, he can't retract the gift. The gift is a gift. You made a kinyan demonstrating that you really want this automobile, even from now, no matter what happens, belonging to the person you're giving it to. If you give him powers of shchimara, because the shchimara has one power over a healthy person. Another interesting power of gifting something. A healthy person who's owed money to, you cannot say transfer the right to collect to somebody else. You can't give it over to a collection agency, so to speak. He cannot give that right over, but unless he sells it. But to gift it to somebody else, you can't do. However, a person on his deathbed, knowing that he's dying, Chazal even gave him the right to gift over loans that he technically could collect on and give it over to somebody else to collect it on. So we give him that if this was a gift of the right for somebody else to collect a loan, it would work. So if he said, my loan will go, the right to collect on a certain loan belongs to so-and-so, we will transfer the right to collect to somebody else. So what you see over here is that if a person does two things, we say not that he's nuts, that he intentionally did two things, and he wanted to give what he was doing, the power of a gift of a person who's on his deathbed, and the power of a gift of somebody who's healthy. And so therefore we have different halachas that come out of that. So we see clearly the Rav says we try to get into people's minds to try to understand why are they doing things. Shmuel says he can't be 100% certain. Maybe the guy is totally nuts, doesn't know halacha. I don't know what this guy had in mind. You don't know for sure. I know most people will have what Rav said, but you cannot know for sure. The guy's thinking, I'm writing up a document, and I'm saying in this document that when I die, that's when the guy should take over the automobile, right? So he doesn't want it to be a matnas shchir mara, which can take effect. He wants the kinyan of the way the guy is going to acquire ownership of the car should take place after he dies. How does but you can't have a document, a kinyan, take effect after a person's died. So since there's a possibility that was an intention, even though most likely it wasn't his intention, Shmuel says we don't put things into his mind unless he explained to us why he did certain things. But the bottom line is that Rav is of the opinion, you can see clearly, that Rav says, no, we try to figure out what was the reason why he did such a thing. So if Rav goes with that umdana, Rav says that you do try to get into people's mind. So Rav could also paskin like Rav Lazar ben Azariah. And Rav Lazar ben Azariah said that you get into a person's mind and say, why does he commit such a large ksuba? Is because he's thinking he's going to go to a wedding day with this person, going to marry that person, and they're going to have a happy family. But he didn't have intention to commit to it from Erison. So Rav could also paskin like Rav Lazar ben Azariah. So who told you that it's only Rav Noson's paskening like Rav Lazar ben Azariah because he holds of umdana? Rav also holds of umdana, so he could also paskin like Rav Lazar ben Azariah. So the Gemara says, you're right. I don't know who paskin like Rav Lazar ben Azariah. El tervayu asum basli umdan. You're right. Both of them go according to umdana. We try to assess what people's minds are, and just like Rav Nosson says, the halacha is like Rav Shimon Shizuri by Mesukan, like a person trying to get to his wife. The Rav says the halach is it has within the matnas chimera and matnas barek. Fine. You always try to figure out what's in people's mind. But the problem with our Mishnah is like this. Mando halacha, that one that says the halach is like a Lazar ben Azariah, shata, he is correct. Why? Because halach is like Lazar Azariah, probably the commitment was made with the intention of getting married, going to a wedding with this person. But Mando Oma ain halacha, but according to the opinion that says the halacha is not like Rav Lazar ben Azariah, because Hakanamic in the maybe we could say that his intention was to commit this Taisvus Ksuba already from the Erison. Because why is he committing this by the Erison? Because he's so excited, he's getting close with her. They're developing a relationship over here. So perhaps he was so excited, he committed to it even from the Erison. And he's not thinking about going to a wedding. He's committing it from now. Well, and we see that they went through an Erison, they got engaged to each other. So, and he wrote up a ksuba, and he wrote the Taisus ksuba by the Erison. He didn't have to. So according to the opinion that you don't pass like Rav Lazar ben Azariah, is because we can assume that he really was sincere about his commitment of Taisus ksuba, and we would paskin that even if he suddenly died in the Erison, never took this to a Nesuin, never took it to a wedding, or he divorced her, he would still be required, or the estate would still be required to give the entire ksuba along with the Taisvus ksuba. So it's not clear who paskin like Rav Lazar ben Azariah or who did not paskin like Rav Lazar ben Azariah. No matter what, you could hold umdana and not paskin like Rav Lazar ben Azariah. So we will stop on Daf Yomi Amud Aleph, Anuvav Amud Aleph, for 5 lines from the top by Yosef.